It's just after 1:30 in the morning in Hawaii. The city lights of Honolulu are still glowing, the ocean is black, and most of the island is asleep. But a cargo jet is rolling down the runway at Daniel K. Inouye International Airport. It's a Boeing 737-200 freighter, a workhorse from another era, hauling containers between islands on a routine run to Maui. There are only 2 people on board, the captain and the first officer. No passengers, no cabin crew, just 2 pilots, some cargo, and the Pacific Ocean waiting quietly in the dark. And in less than 12 minutes, this airplane will be gone. Not because the aircraft was uncontrollable, not because both engines failed at once, but because a fast-moving emergency turned into confusion, and confusion turned into a fatal chain reaction that the crew never had time to fully unwind. Transair Flight 810 is operating as a Part 121 cargo flight from Honolulu to Kahului on the island of Maui, a short hop that's normally straightforward. The airplane, registration N810TA, is a 737-200 converted freighter built in 1975. It's old, loud, and perfectly capable of doing the job it was designed to do as long as everything stays normal. But aviation doesn't need a dramatic villain to go wrong. Sometimes all it takes is one mechanical problem and a crew that gets pulled into the wrong fight at the wrong moment. Shortly after takeoff, the cockpit voice recorder captures something nobody wants to hear in a jet, a thud, followed by vibration. The airplane yaws, and the engine instruments show the right engine's power dropping sharply. Within seconds, both pilots correctly recognize it. The num.2 engine, the right engine, has lost thrust. In that instant, the situation is serious, but it's still manageable. A 737 can fly on one engine. Crews train for this exact scenario. The priorities are simple: keep flying, stabilize, run the checklist, and return. That's the theory. Very quickly, the workload explodes. The captain starts communicating with air traffic control, declaring an emergency multiple times. But the exchange is messy, and at first the controller doesn't clearly acknowledge the emergency call. The captain later describes the radio traffic as overwhelming, taking too much attention away from the cockpit. Meanwhile, the first officer is flying and trying to manage a single-engine departure profile at night, over water, with limited altitude and little margin for delay. And then something subtle happens that will matter more than anyone realizes. After leveling off around 2,000 feet, the first officer reduces thrust on both engines down near idle while the crew tries to sort out which engine is actually affected. The flight data shows the left engine, the good engine, staying low, while the right engine remains the one carrying the load. The captain, busy with the radios, doesn't fully register how far the thrust has been pulled back. This is how a controllable emergency starts turning into something else. Not one big mistake, but a series of small losses of situational awareness. A few minutes in, the captain takes control of the airplane. He asks the first officer what the instruments are showing, and the first officer says something devastating. He identifies the left engine as gone and says they have number 2. In other words, he misidentifies the good engine as the failed one, and the captain accepts it. He does not stop and verify the indications. He does not cross-check the engine pressure ratios carefully enough to catch the mistake in time. From that point on, the crew's actions begin orbiting around a false reality. They believe the left engine is failing, so they focus on the right engine, even though it's the one that was actually damaged. The aircraft performance study later shows something brutally simple. The airplane had enough total thrust available to maintain flight, but only if the crew used it correctly. They don't. The captain calls for the engine failure or shutdown checklist. But the checklist depends on one key step: identify, confirm, and secure the correct engine. Instead, the crew keeps getting pulled off task. They're worried about the right engine's temperature climbing. They're hearing warnings. The airplane's energy state is deteriorating. Airspeed is dropping, altitude is bleeding away, and now they're trapped in a loop of do the checklist and fly the airplane without fully completing either one. The NTSB notes they did not perform key steps, including properly identifying and shutting down the affected engine. And as the left engine remains near idle, the airplane slips into a low energy state that it cannot recover from using only the damaged right engine. Now the ocean matters. The ground proximity warning system starts announcing the numbers pilots hate. 500. Controllers issue low altitude alerts. The crew reports they can't maintain altitude. At 1:44 a.m., the controller offers Kalealoa Airport, closer than Honolulu. The first officer replies with one of the last clear requests of the flight. They want the closest runway, but they are already too low. Stick shaker-like sounds appear on the recording. The cockpit becomes a rush of breathing, warnings, fragments of checklist language, and the growing certainty that this is not going to end with a runway. In the final seconds, the captain says what nobody wants to say out loud. They're going into the water. At 1 hour 45 minutes and 17 seconds AM, the airplane hits the ocean. The flight data shows the left engine still near idle and the right engine producing what it can, but not enough to save the situation. The aircraft breaks apart. And yet, unbelievably, both pilots survive. Search and rescue responds fast. A Coast Guard MH-65 Dolphin helicopter and a Honolulu Fire Department rescue boat reach the scene about 2 miles south of Kalaloa, pulling both pilots from the water and getting them to medical services. One pilot is seriously injured, the other has minor injuries, but they're alive. And in a night ditching in open water, that is not something you get to take for granted. The wreckage sinks. Within days, investigators locate major components about 2 miles off Iwa Beach, at depths roughly 360 to 420 feet, too deep for routine diver recovery. Months later, a major recovery operation brings up the recorders and large sections of the aircraft. The NTSB describes the fuselage breaking into 2 main pieces, engines separating at impact, and extensive documentation and teardown work planned to understand exactly what failed and why the right engine did suffer a real physical failure. The NTSB's examination finds 2 high-pressure turbine stage, 1 blade's missing outer spans, failing due to stress rupture linked to oxidation and corrosion inside the blade lightning holes. That blade failure caused downstream damage and a partial loss of thrust, matching what the instruments showed right after takeoff. The left engine, on the other hand, shows no anomalies that would have prevented it from producing normal thrust. It could have helped. It just didn't because the crew wasn't using it. The tragedy here isn't that something broke. It's that the system still had enough capability left to save the aircraft, and human factors kept that capability locked away behind confusion. The NTSB's conclusion is direct. The crew misidentified the damaged engine after leveling off and reducing thrust, then relied on the damaged engine for thrust for the remainder of the flight, leading to an unintentional descent and forced ditching. Contributing factors included ineffective crew resource management, high workload, and stress. In other words, the airplane didn't run out of options. The crew ran out of time to recognize which option still worked. After the ditching, the FAA took action to halt operations of Rhodes Aviation, the company operating Transair flights in connection with maintenance inspection deficiencies. Reporting at the time noted that this FAA action was tied to a broader investigation into maintenance practices, not the direct cause of the ditching itself. But the bigger lesson from Flight 810 isn't about one company, one airplane, or one night. It's about how aviation accidents can happen in the space between procedures. Because in the real world, emergencies are loud, confusing, and full of interruptions. Checklists don't read themselves. Radios don't politely wait their turn. And even highly experienced crews can start believing a story that isn't true, especially when stress and workload are crushing their ability to cross-check. Transair Flight 810 lasted about 11 minutes from takeoff to impact, and what makes it haunting is that it wasn't an inevitable mechanical collapse. It was a survivable engine problem that turned into a navigational, procedural, and communication breakdown. A partial engine failure. A power reduction that went too far. A misidentified engine. A missing verification step. A checklist left unfinished. Then the ocean. In the end, the 2 pilots lived, and that matters. But the airplane didn't, and neither did the illusion that a single-engine emergency is routine once you add darkness, water, time pressure, and human psychology. Because the real threat wasn't the night. It wasn't even the engine. It was the moment the cockpit stopped agreeing on what was real. If this story made you stop and think, consider subscribing to the channel. New documentaries like this one come out regularly, and each of them explores how small decisions can change everything.